People in the developing world are like people anywhere. They want good healthcare, education for their children, and, at the very least, basic sanitation and clean water. But this all costs money. Money that they don't have. In wealthier countries, these goals have been achieved largely thanks to a little three-letter word: tax.
People who live here didn't choose to live here, and the ones who don't live here would not like to live here. So what I want to say is that I believe every human being should be given decent living conditions. And that's why I was saying that tax is so important to Africa, because it is a way of raising revenue for development.
The world's poorest people, many of them with little or no income, are not in a position to pay tax. But what about the big international companies that are profiting every day from lucrative contracts to extract or harvest the natural resources of developing countries? Would it surprise you to know that Christian Aid estimates that $160 billion a year is lost to these countries because of tax dodging by some less than scrupulous multinational companies? Let's take a second to let that figure sink in, because it's a staggering amount. $160,000 million every year. Money which could be spent on building roads, new schools, hospitals and clinics, and sanitation projects.
A grande questão que se coloca aí é a questão de uma justiça mesmo, quer dizer, a empresa se cedia num país da onde ela retira recursos humanos, naturais, enfim, aonde ela consegue fazer sua produção, e nada mais justo, é uma questão de justiça mesmo, né? Nada mais justo que ali fique uma parte do fruto desse trabalho, né? Que a empresa devolva ao país onde ela está e à sua população um pouco daquilo que ela conseguiu extrair de lá.
When we discuss development, we are discussing it from the focus of development aid. But that is not the real picture. The real story is that Africa is financing the world. There's much, much more money flowing out of Africa to the north through existing global architecture, which enable the rich, both the elites in Africa and also multinational corporations that are operating in Africa to move resources from the south to the north.
The amount of money developing countries lose to tax dodging is in fact far greater than the amount they receive in aid. And this is why, for the sake of the world's poorest people, we need to trace the tax. At the moment, it's very difficult to keep track of where the multinationals make their money. The companies report their profits on a global basis, rather than breaking it down country by country.
El otro gran problema que estamos enfrentando es que en el Perú todo el tema de la tributación es prácticamente reservado, ¿no? Se maneja bajo el secreto total y absoluto. Es decir, la sociedad civil, la población peruana en general, no tiene acceso a toda la información sobre los tributos que pagan estas empresas, ¿no? Entonces, este tema del secreto tributario es uno de los problemas centrales que muestran la falta de transparencia en el Perú sobre estos temas, ¿no?
This lack of transparency allows unscrupulous companies to move their profits to the places where they will have to pay the least amount of tax, the tax havens. It's part of the process known as capital flight.
Capital flight is money which should have been invested in Africa, but which, because people want to evade paying taxes where they are based or in the countries where they originate from, they sent it out to other jurisdictions where the tax rates are lower. So the money actually flows from Africa to those jurisdictions. Africa is not able anymore to benefit from those funds.
The problem has been, or still is, that the capacity of many African countries to monitor the practices of multinational companies, some of them which have revenues 3-4 times the GDP of these countries, they don't have the capacity to really monitor the practices of these companies.
Tax authorities in developing countries would find it much easier to detect tax dodging if companies had to declare what profits they are making in every country where they are operating. That's why Christian Aid and others are calling for a new international accounting standard.
To ensure that the countries are able to follow the money flow, we are calling for a country-by-country reporting of the profits that these multinational companies are making. What impact that would have is that we would be able to monitor where the economic activities take place and where the reports are made, the profits are recorded.
Bueno, en primer lugar, Christian ahí está colocando un tema que nos parece fundamental y que es sumamente útil en América Latina, es decir, está comenzando a discutir este tema tributario, ¿no? Y en la misma medida las posibilidades de lograr un estándar internacional que apunte a la transparencia financiera, que apunte a que finalmente las empresas estén obligadas a informar sobre lo que pagan en nuestros países, sin duda va a ser una iniciativa que va a ser muy bien recibida en nuestros países y va a ayudar enormemente a que finalmente las políticas de transparencia se consoliden, ¿no?
Country-by-country reporting is very important to developing countries like Ghana because it will ensure that governments are able to tax appropriately all the companies that work within their borders at the right time.
It will be in our interest to support such an effort because when we have greater transparency at the international level in terms of tax payment, we will have a lot more revenue in our country because the companies that operate in our environment, lots of them are also companies that operate in other countries. Therefore, when you achieve transparency at the international level, it will translate into high revenues for us.
É muito importante que isso seja padronizado, porque hoje o capital está internacionalizado, os estados estão em franca articulação, então não é possível ter uma norma que vigindo somente em um país, sendo que em outro aquela norma já não vale.
With the additional tax revenue, governments in developing countries could provide the kind of basic services that would help to lift their citizens out of poverty.
In the Philippines, improving health services would mean that you reduce maternal mortality. We improve the feeding programs going on in the schools. We are able to provide more classrooms and things like that.
What can this money be used for? It can be used for many things. It can be used to improve agriculture, it can be used for education, it can be used to build infrastructure, it can be used to improve our maternal mortality rates, and it can also be used as a means of generating more wealth, creating more wealth for Ghanaians generally.
The housing that are standing just behind me is one step where the government is investing in building decent housing for families. Right now there are about 1,000 families that have been moved out of Kibera and been provided with decent housing with clean water and a health dispensary. So this is the kind of impact dependency on own resources can have on development.
Companies would benefit too through better roads and infrastructure and a healthier and better educated workforce. Taxes help to make governments more accountable, political systems more democratic, and countries more stable. We want the International Accounting Standards Board to introduce a new accounting standard. This would require companies to report their profits and the amount of taxes they have paid in every country where they operate. As a first step, let's persuade the UK's leading companies to come out in favour of this new accounting standard. For the sake of the world's poorest people.